GB News broadcast, half of all UK stories are about Muslims, and analysis shows. I'm going to read into this exclusive from The Guardian, you guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Reganelite here with an exclusive from The Guardian with the headline: The GB News broadcasts half of all UK stories about Muslims, analysis shows. Exclusive reveals that the CfMM report over a 2-year period says the channel's negative focus on Islam borders on an obsession. Guys, while you're here, make sure you hit the like button and share this across social media so others are notified of this video. So, I know this is going to bring quite an interesting discussion. So, first and foremost, Regan, do you believe this story? Now, one thing, I'm going to say no, believe it or not. I will say that GB News are obsessed with immigration. That is a fundamental thing. Now, it's easy for me to say that. I don't regularly watch GB News. If you are a regular watcher of GB News, give me your honest opinion. Do you hear more about immigration and Muslims than any other story? Let me know down in the comments below on that. Yeah, I generally would like your feedback on that. But based on the majority of news and stories that I hear from GB News, that's mainly the crux of what I normally hear about, is about immigration. Not particular Muslims, but more on immigration. Now maybe that's just what I hear and what comes across past here in my ear. Do I hear things about Muslims? Of course I do. Do I hear it excessively in comparison to specifically immigration, migration? Not really. But it differentiates, yeah, how much people listen to GB News or how much are responding to them. This is very excessive to say that for a report to actually, for those to actually have a report here, an analysis to state that a self-proclaimed, they're supposed to be, they seem to be a news organisation, because hence the name GB News. But this is quite a statement to make, to say that half of all UK stories are about Muslims, according to this analysis report. I will obviously do say this, though. Do take it with a pinch of salt, because yes, while I am someone who's very much against GB News, because I don't agree with GB News, I don't agree with what their pundits and their analysis and the people that they have on there, because I generally believe that they do not speak on the interests of the British public. That is my general perception. That is because of what I've consistently heard over and over again. They don't talk enough about this, about people's needs enough. I do hear more about immigration than anything else. They don't talk enough about wanting about the situations that many people are facing. Now, that's not to say that we don't hear enough about other mainstream medias either, because Sky News, the BBC, a lot of others do not talk about one of the big fundamental problems that people are having, and that is this cost of living crisis. No, enough is talked about it from the mainstream media. They don't talk enough about it, and I would throw GB News in that category with them as well. So it is there for me. They are problematic. GB News, they are certainly more problematic than other mainstream media outlets, in my opinion. But I'm not so sure about this. This doesn't feel. It does come across to me like an attempt to smear GB News in a way. With some statistical analysis. Now, do I believe that GB News has a problem with Muslims? I can't answer that, because I don't watch GB News on a regular basis. So that's my general and honest answer. Does the perception of what I hear and what I read and what I from GB News gives me that impression that they have a problem with Muslims? I do get that impression, yes. But do I think that there is something here to this? Maybe. There might be something here to this. But I know some people who are fanatics of GB News. They will see this as nothing more than a smear against them. And that's totally fine. That's totally your opinion. But for me, GB News is not a broadcast that I take seriously in any way, shape, or form. So let's read what they says. So GB News accounts for half of all news broadcast coverage of Muslims over a 2-year period, much of it negative according to new analysis. So the findings demonstrate an excessive focus on Muslims bordering on an obsession according to a new report by the Center for Media Monitoring, the CfMM. So researchers allege the stories about Islam are overwhelmingly negative and fail to understand the diverse nature of Muslim communities in the UK. This is what their analysis is stating, okay? Now they said that the coverage could fuel community tensions and contribute to civil unrest. Sayeeda Warsi described the research as shocking, while former ITN executive and Ofcom regulator Stewart Purvis said the findings raise vital questions for the broadcast regulator. Now, I don't know. I guess a question we would be asking, if there is some merit to this, why has Ofcom not looked into this? If there is some merit into this, I think that's a genuine question. If there is merit to this analysis piece. The 2 years analysis found that GB News mentioned of Muslims or Islam more than 17,000 times in its output, which they say accounted for almost 50% of total mentions on UK news channels. BBC News and Sky News accounted for 32% and 21% respectively. So GB News, they say, it's account for almost 50%. So that's what they're claiming. While they're also saying that other news outlets are doing 32 to 21%. The report found that GB News was particularly focused on domestic stories on these topics in comparison with its rival channels, where foreign news contributed a greater amount to their output. He also alleges that Muslims and their beliefs are often presented on GB News as part of a conspiracy to undermine Britain or the British way of life. This takes the form of depicting Muslims as a Trojan horse in the UK. According to the findings, Islamophobia was referenced on GB News on 1,180 occasions, accounting for 60% of all mentions when compared with the BBC and Sky News. The researchers said the stories were overwhelmingly critical of the concept of Islamophobia. During the last summer riots, GB News accounted for 62% of all clips on UK news channel that associated Muslims with the riots. Researchers alleged that GB News repeatedly framed Muslims as perpetrators rather than victims of violence, pushed disinformation, and that the channel downplayed attacks on mosques and Muslim communities. The report also notes that GB News was particularly animated by the idea of two-tier policing, airing debates that question whether police response were harsher towards certain groups such as white working class Britons, while allegedly being more lenient towards Muslim communities. Lady Warsi said the consistent stereotyping and stigmatization of British Muslim communities as the enemy or the problem by a platform which, with millions of viewers, is deliberate, dangerous, and has real-life consequences. Seeing the impact of far-right radicalization with the alarming year-on-year rise in anti-Muslim hatred, culminating in this summer's riots where mosques and Muslim communities were openly targeted, should have been a wake-up call for all. It is imperative that both the regulator and the government take decisive action to ensure broadcasting platforms are not used to fuel hatred and extremism that plays out as violence disorder on the streets of Britain. Purvis, who wrote on a commentary in the report, said the findings raised questions for Ofcom. Has its deregulated model for broadcast news created an unintended consequences? Can a broadcaster be allowed to try and build its audience and political influence by consistently neglecting a portrayal of an ethnic community? Razgala Hamed, the director of CfMM, said, prior to GB News entering the British media landscape, most of the attention was focused on the misrepresentation of Muslims and Islam's in print, an online publication that, given that Ofcom broadcast regulations were always more robust than the press regulator IPSO. However, the volume of anti-Muslim hate on GB News and Ofcom reluctance to regulate its harmful content has meant that politicians and commentators have given carte blanche to malign Muslim and Islam in a way that no other channel does. A robust regulator should demand that the channel performs according to long-established codes for broadcasters and enforce impartiality regulations. A GB News spokesperson has said, this inaccurate and defamatory report is nothing more than a senile, self-assuming attempt to silence free speech. It proves exactly why a news organisation like GB News needs to exist and why it's succeeding. We are concerned that at no point did this project of the Muslim Council of Britain contact GB News or its presenters to allow them to respond to these highly defamatory allegations. Now, this part here at the end, I have to say, I don't know as of right now. I did try to look up, and if someone does find out, do let me know. I don't know if the CfMM actually did reach out to GB News at all when they put this report together before putting it out public. Now, if they did, then it would be a very different story. But if they didn't tell GB News that they were going to be putting out this report and give GB News a chance to respond, I think that's wrong for them to do so. GB News should be allowed to give their side of the story on what they are broadcasting, even if I fundamentally disagree with them as a whole. So this point here does stick out to me. You know, I understand the Muslim Council, Brinton, that this. I understand what they are saying. I understand the concerns. I understand the perception that is being made by GB News on a specific group. I totally respect that. I really, really do. But they should have that in that perspective, they should have told them before putting it out there that they were going to be putting this out there. So, but I don't know that. I don't know if GB News are lying or not, because I would not be surprised if GB News were lying at all. A lot in that report is very, very, very concerning indeed. That is very, very concerning. That's this imagery that is being made about Muslims. And we shouldn't be portraying all of them as the same in any way, shape, or form. Now, like I said, I don't watch enough of GB News, so I can't comment if this is what is the case. I choose not to watch GB News. I barely put any clips of GB News on my channel anyway, as those who have been long subscribers know, because of how I feel about the broadcaster itself. But if you are a regular, if you do watch GB News, do you hear non-stop about immigration and Muslims? Is that the only thing? Or do you actually hear about other stories and news that come out of the program? And I generally would welcome it. Please be constructive in your comments about it, because I generally want to know. Are they saying anything positive about Muslims and Muslim communities? I think it's a good question worth asking as well. Like, do you have some examples of where they've talked about some of the good things that Muslim communities have done in England or in other parts of the UK, for example? And I think that's a question worth putting out there as well. But I generally do think that Ofcom should look into this analysis and perhaps look into it, even if it comes across as a bit far-fetched to some people, whether you agree or disagree with it. I do think Ofcom should look into it. Will they look into it? I don't know. Do I think any action is going to be taken against GB News? Probably not. But the fact that there is a story like this out there, that someone a report has been made about GB News, about how much they cover obsessed with Islam and Muslim, that's very concerning. That is very concerning. You know, they call themselves a news broadcast channel, and yet they seem to be covering one particular subject all the time for me, when there's lots of other things that they can talk about as well. But that is the perception that I have. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you guys make of this analysis report? Do you generally believe it? Do you think absolutely this is definitely the case? Are you somebody that regularly watches it? Is that your perception of it too? Or perhaps you have a different perspective of GB News. Do you find GB News, maybe you are somebody who thinks that it actually provides you with relatively helpful news and information? Maybe some of you do. Let me know your thoughts and more on this down in the comment section below. If you found this video interesting, please hit the like button. It would be greatly appreciated. Share it across social media so others are notified of this video. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider subscribing, because it really does help support the channel. If you want to go one step further and financially support me and the work that I do here, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member for as little as 99p, or join me on Rumble or Patreon for exclusive content on those platforms. So thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.